How's it going, everyone? Thank you for joining me on a new episode of the Music Review Podcast, on another episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week, the week of April 10th, on, this album bomb episode from Rod Wave's latest album, Soulfly. And if you're new to the Music Reviewer Podcast or just Best and Worst Track of the Week in general, my name's Josh. I'm a music reviewer, and Best and Worst Track of the Week is just a weekly segment where I take all new entries into the Billboard Hot 100, take one that's the worst, take one that's the best, grade each track with a letter grade. So like I said earlier, this is an episode where I'm covering mainly a lot of new entries from Rod Wave's latest album onto the Billboard Hot 100. And just to touch on that, I covered the album just as a regular album review as a previous episode. So if you're wanting to hear the full review of Rod Wave's latest album, Soulfly, go ahead and check that out. But with that being said, this is basically a condensed episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. All tracks that I thoroughly covered on the Soulfly review. I will just basically be giving you the letter grade with a few thoughts, but if I didn't really cover thoroughly any of these new tracks on the album review, I will be basically giving you my thoughts on the tracks. But if you're wanting to hear a full version of the review of this album, just check out that episode of Soulfly, the album review from Rod Wave. That's pretty much it. A couple other artists this week that we're covering. Lil Nas X, he hasn't showed up in a bit, and then also Moneybagg Yo, Future, Taylor Swift. Pretty much if you're just wanting to stick around, there's some tracks from those artists that I'll be covering. And then also, just as a reminder, not too much podcast wise, I did cover Lana Del Rey's Chemtrails Over the Country Club. If you're wanting to hear that review, that is that was covered earlier this month. And then last week's episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. Best track actually did end up going to Rod Wave, if you haven't listened to that episode yet. Worst track being Justin Bieber. And of course, that episode is essentially the Justin Bieber Justice review, if you want to hear my thoughts on that album in general. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. So, highlight-wise, just on what's happening on the charts in general. A new number one by Lil Nas X with Montero. That's not surprising if you've been somewhat conscious or not living under a rock. That was a huge controversial track that seemed to stir up some, some backlash from a certain group of people. But nonetheless, the track is pretty popular and they got a number one hit. Cardi B's up down to number 4. I thought that would have been a little bit higher this week. Mood by Ian Dior and 24K Golden up to number 9. I honestly thought that track was pretty much dead in the water right now, but still has some momentum. It went up to number 9 this week, although that was a number 1 hit at one point. I'm not entirely sure if that track is entirely done with yet. Tombstone by Rod Wave up to number 11. That is probably a result from his album, but pretty cool to see that one of his tracks got up that high. Astronaut on the Ocean by Masked Wolf up to number 12. That was a pretty cool thing to see. Although I didn't really have much to say, or I was pretty indifferent when I reviewed the track when it came on. I don't know. This is different. He's an international artist in terms of like US stuff. Pretty cool to see that this is gaining that much traction. We'll see if it breaks the top 10. I think it might. Best Friend by Saweetie and Doja Cat up to 17. I thought that was pretty good. I'm digging a lot of the work that Doja Cat's been putting out lately, so the collab by Saweetie and her having some momentum is good to see. Without You by Kid Leroy, one of the worst tracks of the week not too long ago, up to 31. And then also Crybaby by Megan Thee Stallion up to 44. By this point, Crybaby has been out for a while now. I'm not sure why this track has some traction still, but it went up to 44 this week. I thought that was interesting. And then also Heat Waves by Glass Animals up to 50. I thought this was on its way out, but it still has some traction. It went up a couple spots or so. Like I said, in the past couple weeks, if Glass Animals with this track breaks the top 50, it might do so. I don't know. I think this track might have some more steam to it. We'll see. And some tracks that went out this week. A Good Time by Nico Moon, an old worst track of the week, finally out. I thought that track was terrible when it came out. Surprised it stuck on the Hot 100 for as long as it did. All of the Justin Bieber tracks, for the most part, dropped out. So that was a thing. Album Bomb is pretty much out, not surprisingly. And then that track from Chris Young and Kane Brown dropped out as well. That debuted last week. So pretty short-lived runtime on that one. Although I have suspicions that it might come back, but we'll see. But anyways, without further ado, let's go ahead and do the tracks from this week. Alright, so first track this week, coming off the Soulfly album, Sneaky Links by Rodway at 99. I thought this track was okay. The more I listened to it, I maybe found some more attributes that I dug about it. It has a murky and dark nature to it. The track feels like it's missing maybe a rap verse due to how spaced out it is. I feel like this track maybe could have used a feature, but I guess it's Rodwave style to not typically take features. But it executes the aesthetic nicely. It does what it needs to do. It's not bad. There's an emotional nature to it, and there's some lovely plucked guitar riffs that make the track a bit more somber overall. But I was kind of indifferent for the most part, but I gave this track a B. Next track was Shock the World by Rodwave at 96. This track has more of a confessional nature, a storytelling like nature, of candid, if you will. The track is just pretty straightforward. It's still executed nicely overall. Rodwave is essentially flaunting how he has a lot of money, states how he hasn't gotten even started in terms of how rich he's getting. I thought this was one of the lower points on the album, but overall in the context of like best and worst track of the week, I give it a B-. What's Love by Rodwave at 94. This track has a sensitive nature to it. It's a love song. It's love song like, but he has kind of like this fuck these hoes attitude. A lot of these girls that he's interacting with on a day-to-day basis are gold diggers. It's essentially a fuck you. Although I did call it a love song, it feels love song like, but it really isn't. I dig the dry percussive nature on this track, but I'm not sure how to feel on this one. Could have been better. There's this weird side spoken word part where he talks about this situation that happened in Vegas. Don't really know if that enriched the song, but I gave it a B. Next track, OMDB by Rodwave. Thought this was a good track. Thoroughly reviewed it on the album review. I give it a B+. There's a nice mid to late 2000s R&B charm to it. How'd the Game Go? Another track that I covered on the album review. Give it a B. Rod's rapping is executed quite nicely. There's a nice flowed presence on here. Pills and Bills at 85 was a track that I did not cover thoroughly, but there's a nice sensitive accompanying bass line on this, especially on intro. Although on the verses the sub bass can sound a bit distorted and muddy, it's weird because the tone switches all throughout the track. It can make the track feel a bit jerky, but it's very meh. It could have been better. This track kind of suffers from the same undeveloped nature that happened on the previous album Rodwave did, Pray for Love. So it kind of reminded me a bit of that. I give it a B. Next track was All I Got from Rodwave at 71. I give this track a B+. Thoroughly reviewed it on the album review. It's not a bad track. There's some soft and smooth vocals from Rod on here. Blame on You from Rodwave. I liked it. I gave it... didn't thoroughly review it. This track utilizes some ambient guitar textures. There's more of a rap aesthetic on here. Rod does more of his like shouted delivery on this track, and the overall presence that Rod has on this is pretty decent. The material he's singing about is very emotional and believable, and I liked it. I give it a B. Next track was Gone Till November at 61. Thoroughly reviewed it on the album review. There's a very sensitive nature to this on this track. Go ahead and listen to it. It's one of the better tracks on the album. I give it a B. Soulfly, covered on the album review as well. I give it a B. The track addresses some meta topics like his influence on the youth due to his fame as an artist. Next track was Richer featuring Polo G at 22. Honestly, I kind of messed up on the album review with this track. I thought this track premiered a week or two ago, but it actually came in fresh from the album. I don't know what track I was mistaking it for, but this track is okay. Rod's vocals can feel a bit drowned out when the sub bass comes in a bit overwhelmingly, even though he's belting at times. There's nice rhythmic vocal ad-libs that are thrown on this track. So there's some impressive lines from Rod Wave as he spits on here that are interchangeably done while singing too. It's pretty impressive. Some nice melodic material happening on the guitars that is covered up at times from the really deep sub bass that muddies the track a little bit. Polo G has one of the better features or performances I've heard in some time from him. I don't know if that's saying much. The Richer Than I Ever Been hook on this track is nice as well. It's a focal point on the track. I give it a B. Next track was You All Over Me by Taylor Swift featuring Maren Morris. This is Taylor's version at 51. This is off of the latest Fearless reissue after, I guess, Taylor's trying to claim ownership of the tracks on that album after they were recently purchased by someone, her masters. I guess that's pretty much the long story short. This You All Over Me track was a B-side off of Fearless. It never really quite made it. But I like the track overall. It's rustic and organic in nature. The track just naturally grooves and progresses, especially as the drum track kicks in. Maren's voice blends in well, singing in the backing harmony parts. I think it blends in well with Taylor overall. I don't really think Maren Morris stands out, but she utilizes her voice decently for what it was. But the track is overall subdued. It doesn't really climax at any point, but I give it a B. Although I really would have liked some more climatic moments or just some build up to something on this track. Hard for the Next, Moneybagg Yo and Future at 49. I thought this was a pretty average track. Honestly, I just have not been getting into anything Moneybagg Yo has put out, especially since the beginning of this show, Best and Worst Track of the Week. And what is particularly interesting or unique about Moneybagg Yo, I've yet to hear anything. He's average, and it's not even on the level of like what Drake is average or what an average Drake performance would be, because I feel like a good midpoint for good rap or R&B is what can Drake put out. He's just average, the typical rap or R&B artist putting something out with some minimal effort. That is basically Moneybagg Yo. His rap chops are pretty standard. His wordplay isn't particularly interesting. His flow is wordy at times on this track. It tries to fit in a ton of words in each stanza, and it really doesn't make the track any better. The beat is a dime a dozen. Pretty sure I've heard this same type of beat thrown on thousands of other rap songs. It's essentially post-luxury rap, if that's even a thing. And Future's pretty uninteresting on this track too. I give it a C. Next track was at number 1, Montero, Call Me By Your Name by Lil Nas X. Good to see Lil Nas X back on the charts, or just putting music out in general. Honestly, this probably isn't as good as Old Town Road, but I think I like it a little bit better than Holiday, the last single he put out. I like how the track is centered around these thin and bright guitar textures. The production is a bit clap-centric, and the percussion, the elements that are utilized on that part are a bit bland. I do like the build-up to Call Me By Your Name, that hook. That is the focal point of the track. When it hits on that part, it's great. The vocals are also performed in a bit of a subdued nature for most of the track. It really colors the track in a sinister nature. Nice usage overall on that front, but the track is a bit short too. I would have liked it to be a little bit more developed or elongated, but it's not bad. I give it a B+. And yeah, we're to the point of the show where I give the best and worst track of the week. We always start on the worst track of the week to leave on a positive note. But yeah, worst track this week was at number 69 with Big Purr, parentheses PRDD, with Coi Leray and Pooh Shiesty. And a couple weeks ago when I first heard Coi Leray, I honestly wasn't too fond of whatever track was making it onto the Hot 100. Although I will say that track was a bit better than this. This is quite a disaster. I still don't understand really what makes Coi Leray a bit standout or interesting. I'm not entirely sure still if she's a rapper or an R&B artist, but this track is with Pooh Shiesty, and I honestly want to know how much Pooh Shiesty was paid to be on this track, because this is extremely phoned in or lacking any effort. First of all, Coi Leray, she sounds a bit like the boy band from quite some time ago called Mindless Behavior. If anyone ever had the fortune of knowing who that band is, they were a prepubescent boy band that was from Disney Channel fame. She sounds exactly like what one of their members sounds like. So in terms of like the cheap autotune crooning and amateur, I guess, performance thrown on or whatever she's doing on here, the back and forth between her and Pooh Shiesty, I think, is supposed to sound sexy, but the beat that's thrown on here doesn't match that at all. The track is pretty blatantly about hooking up for like a quickie in the back of a car. The instrumental does not accentuate that nature at all. Pooh honestly did sound as amateur, but it's pretty low effort performance from him overall. It's just a sloppy track. I give it worst track of the week for that reason. Best track of the week goes to Rod Wave with Don't Forget. I thought this was the best track on that album. I was pretty confident that this would be the best track going in for this week. I like the hooky melodic ideas that Rod throws in all over this track. Rod shows his rapping chops on here. There's a really smooth flow, a nice delivery. I like the embellishing vocal runs that he throws in all throughout the track. And it's the most catchy and concise track really on that album. The track has a nice groove. The bass hits are spaced out quite nicely. And then the nature of the content of this song is a call out to the rap game, with this snippet from like a Pimp C interview where he states like the negative nature and attitude amongst a lot of rappers, especially with them having so much money and not using it for good or positivity. The track is essentially calling out that whole, I guess, bag of problems. But the track is just extremely hooky. It's earwormy. And I think Rod fits in really well on these type of tracks. I really wish the album went more in this direction. But best track of the week goes to Don't Forget. And that's this week's episode. Thanks for sticking with me this week. If you listen to the end, my name is Josh. I'm a music reviewer. Stay tuned for more reviews soon. We'll see what happens next week. I don't think the Billboard Hot 100 is going to be as busy next week, but we'll see. If you dug what you heard, like and subscribe, leave some feedback, tell me what it did good, what it did bad. Subscribe on your respective streaming services as well. But anyways, take care of yourselves. I'll see you all later.